textbooks are bogus, but also not actually. At least that's what Richard W. Lowen would have you believe in his book, Teaching What Really Happened. You see, history as a discipline is, at its core, a debate. There are multiple perspectives, a lot of issues, and each of them can be backed by evidence, but like all debates, this debate has rules. You need sources to be able to make a claim, and you need to cite those sources in a way any reader can access. You need credentials to be able to change perspectives on history, something backing your skill as a historian. And you need to approach these topics using language and organization that historians across the board have systematized to be most efficient. Some of these are exclusionary, maybe they need to be changed, but it's not important for today. That's a whole other argument for a whole other day and a whole other review of a whole other book. Textbooks, Lowen argues, do not follow these rules and are therefore potentially dangerous. They don't have sources, and where they do have them, they don't cite them in the proper way, making them difficult to access. They're written by people without degrees or credentials as historians, and they neglect the organizational language of historians, making them easier to understand, but often leading them to misrepresent history. Because they break these rules, they're often unreliable for sources as what actually happened in history. A textbook-based curriculum is therefore not only poorly researched, but poorly organized and unprofessional. In short, textbook-based curriculum does not teach history, just facts. This has unfortunately become the norm in history teaching, but it doesn't have to stay that way. Lowen argues that this approach to history teaching causes three main problems. Number one, forest versus twig approach. Textbooks feel the need to be unreasonably, ridiculously massive for no reason other than to stress poor teachers out. There's no way we can be expected to cover all that material to the degree of depth that it will make an actual difference in our students' lives. It's like covering one twig from every tree in the forest. Instead, we need to cover a few important topics and have our students actually stand a chance of understanding and remembering them. A few important trees. Number 2. History as textbooks present it is bad due to a lack of need for proper sourcing and external demands placed on a textbook to get it approved in various states. Most textbooks say things that are outright wrong about history. And it's these topics where we have a duty to focus our trees as history teachers, because the majority of the American public believes the lies that textbooks have told them for generations. Number 3. History textbooks don't teach history. A student who leaves a history class will ideally know a bunch of facts, but more likely than not know nothing, because facts are boring and bogus. To teach history, we need to teach our students how to do history, how to do research for themselves, and how to understand history concepts like historiography. These are things that textbooks just cannot do. The book itself, as a whole, it's solid. Calls into question the common practices of many high school teachers, offering better alternatives. It does a good job at explaining the issues with textbooks while also giving the reader solutions to the problem in the form of better organized class structure. Lowen, furthermore, offers ideas on activities that involve real history work and are feasible in places even with minimal resources. 1.5 enthusiastic thumbs up. But it's okay. I guess we have to stick with 1.5 because it does have some issues. Unfortunately, while it teaches a lot of great strategies for how to make history classes actually about history, it does so while focusing only on a few topics. These topics are often mishandled in high school history, those same special trees we have to focus on from earlier, that have been mishandled throughout high schools in the past. And Lowen does advocate for a more focused curriculum, highlighting only a few ideas in detail, rather than many topics with little or no context. But I wish the book itself had given more tips for how to generally apply a textless curriculum, and less special focus points where it needed to we needed to take extra care. That being said, I'm grateful for the new insight. I didn't know or understand many of the topics that he specifically addressed this way, and nearly as well as I should, and I'm coming out of the book with a much better grasp of the causes of cultural dominance of Europe, causes of the Civil War, and the culture of racism following Reconstruction. All these go misrepresented by teachers across the country, including, apparently, my own. This is in addition to the practical knowledge of how to teach with actual history in mind and develop a curriculum without relying on a textbook. Things that I planned on doing, but now have a much better concept of doing because of teaching what really happened. Similarly, social studies is likely to learn things about how to address their subject. The book more focuses on history, but Lowen takes time to make sure that any of his ideas could be applied more broadly, giving examples from multiple social studies disciplines along with the basic history. So even though most social studies don't focus as much on the textbook as history does, this is still a very valuable resource and a place where we could learn a lot about how to create a better curriculum. One particular piece of advice that I definitely intend to follow as I move on to my own classroom is to have a bin full of outdated history textbooks from various points throughout the country's history. Then, by having each of the students take a different book and compare what they see on the same subject, they can see how historiography, how views of history, changed over the decades. This is what I meant in the beginning when I mentioned that history textbooks were bogus, but also not actually. They're terrible for history, but they're great for historiography, showing students what people at specific times thought of history. To see how this works, I have looked up a topic in American history in 3 separate versions of Lowen's favorite textbook to disparage, The American Pageant. To make sure we get the most out of this exercise, I went with something extremely controversial, the 7th President of the United States, Andrew Jackson. So, in the first edition of The American Pageant, published in 1954, Andrew Jackson is touted as a virtuous Indian fighter. The book sings praises of how he crushed the Indians at Horseshoe Bend, and further proclaims him to be a champion of the masses. Even at points, comparing him to literal Jesus. When he is eventually replaced, it calls his replacement a simpering dandy from the aristocratic East, as if no man could compare to the greatness of this legendary president. The 10th edition, published in 1998, hardly mentions Jackson at all. His name appears only 10 times throughout the course of the text. More than half of those are references to other text or references to other historical figures and their relationship to Jackson. However, he is mentioned as a competent president in a question in one of the maybe 4 times that it actually refers to him as a president. However, the text mostly ignores him, as if aware of the potential controversy, and rather than actually addressing it, deciding simply to pretend he didn't exist. Now, the 15th edition, published in 2015, finally recognizes a broader spectrum of understandings on Andrew Jackson. It acknowledges him as both a hero of the West and a scourge of the Indians. It directly references how he caused the Trail of Tears, and comes across almost critical of him as a historical figure. Oh, how times have changed. Final thoughts on the book. It's definitely a must-read for anyone going into history teaching who wants to lead a classroom outside the prepackaged conformity of a textbook. Social studies teachers also benefit greatly from the ideas that Lowen presented in this book, and I entirely support the book's philosophy. I encourage that whoever can and find the time to study it, unless you took Dr. Noakes' class, in which case you probably already get the gist.